Hello, I'm Evie Lynn. Welcome to Cloud Seeding Session 3. Trying out a new mic today, and I do not have a handle on it yet. It's kind of driving me a little bit nuts because it's got a little bit of a delay in it. So we'll see how this goes. I feel like I never have it all together when I get ready to stream. Maybe that's everybody. Maybe it's just me. But hopefully you guys can hear me better. Hopefully the mic will pick up the whole time and not die, because I have been testing it for about an hour and a half now. So we're just gonna muddle through the best we can. The good thing about having the crazy delayed echo in my ear is that I should know if the mic dies. May affect my cadence of speech a little bit, but we're gonna give it a shot. We're gonna roll with it. So it's been a minute. I was not able to get on much the last couple of weeks because we've had some health issues in my family. I'm sure everyone here has been through that. A little different time of day this time. Oh my gosh, my chair is rolling away with me. So we'll see how this goes. I don't know what's happening. Normally I have a chat up, but it's not coming on today. I don't know what's happening with that. I don't know. See, now I'm wondering if this is even streaming correctly, so bear with me. I'm gonna see. Okay, it says I'm live. So hopefully, I'm a hot mess. Hot mess. Okay. Hopefully everything's working the way it's supposed to, in theory, a little bit. Today, we are talking about an idea. First of all, let me back up and rewind. If this is your first time doing a cloud seeding session with me, what cloud seeding is kind of an advanced brainstorming. Instead of just spitballing random ideas, I am going to take a snippet of an idea I already have formed and kind of talk through it with you guys. And what this is doing is it's allowing me, hit my mic, I'm not used to wearing a clip-on mic. It's allowing me an outlet for ideas that I've had that for one reason or another I've decided not to pursue. Maybe they didn't really resonate with me. Maybe I didn't feel I could do the idea justice. Maybe it's an idea that I was really excited about but just got stuck on and never could flesh out. So what it does for you guys is, if you are having writer's block, if you want to write but you just cannot come up with anything, hopefully this will give you a jumping off point, a launch pad, starting point, whatever you want to call it. None of these ideas are copyrighted because they're baby ideas. They're barely fleshed out. A lot of what I'll be doing during cloud seeding is asking questions, talking about different avenues that you could pursue with this. And you may start listening to me and say, that's not the way I would do that. I would go this route. That's what I want you to do. I want you to take these ideas. I want you to make them your own. I want you to have fun with it. I want you to run with it. And I want it to help you to get unstuck, to find new paths in your own creative endeavors. You're welcome to turn these ideas into stories or songs or poems or whatever your artistic medium is. Or you can just use them as an exercise to kind of get your creative juices flowing. So today, our idea that we're going to talk through a little bit is called The 11th Lamp. I had a title for this story that I never wrote, but I called it The 11th Lamp. So if you're familiar, I got to give you a little background before I can kind of go into the actual idea, but if you're familiar with Aladdin and the magic lamp, this is something stemming from that. So I wanted to kind of pursue where the lamp came from. So it kind of started with trying to come up with a backstory for Aladdin's magic lamp, for the lamp itself and the genie, and how that all became a thing. If you're not familiar with the original story of Aladdin and his magic lamp, it comes from a collection of short stories. Um, and some people call it Arabian Nights. I think the original title, I gosh, I gotta hear my face. I think I think that the original title is 1001 Nights, but it's basically um, just a collection of Middle Eastern um, and Asian short stories. Um, the original collection began being recorded, from what I've researched, around the 8th century. And if any of this, if you know better and you don't think this is accurate, feel free to correct me. But from what I've read, the original recording of these stories began around the 8th century. Obviously, there would have been a large oral tradition way before they began to be recorded. Um, and the actual story of Aladdin wasn't added until the 18th century, so much, 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 much later. About what was that, 1,000 years later? Um, and it was added by a French translator that was translating Arabian Nights from its original language, which I'm not sure what it was originally, probably several different languages that it was originally recorded in. But he was translating it into French, and he had heard the story of Aladdin and the Magic Lamp from a storyteller, Hannah. You're gonna look at my notes. Hannah Diab. I probably slaughtered that. I apologize. But she was a Syrian storyteller, and supposedly he heard this story from her and wanted to add it into Arabian Nights. But this, as far as I could find, was the very first mention of a magic lamp anywhere in literature, was this 18th century rendition of Arabian Nights. So it's not got a lot of historical basis that we know about. Um, Obviously, because of the oral tradition, we don't know exactly where the magic lamp surfaced or who the first person to bring up the magic lamp was, what the original backstory might have been, if there was one. But that makes it kind of nice for us as writers because we can do whatever we want. We don't have to worry about a lot of, historical precedents with this story. You can kind of just do whatever you want to do because there's not a lot of precedence with it. They think the idea for the magic lamp actually came from a real life invention around the 16th century of something called a magic lantern, which I looked up, and it's basically just an early form of a projector. They would have this lantern, they would put the pictures in front of it, and it would project the pictures up onto the wall. So they called it the magic lantern. And I imagine that was probably its own little storytelling device. Um, the original story of Aladdin, funny enough, was set in China, which I didn't know. I've read that story a couple of times, but I didn't remember where it was set exactly. Um, I have a hard time picturing anything except for, what you get from the Disney movies. um, but it was originally set in China. Um, the story would have developed along the Silk Road, which, if you don't know what the Silk Road is, it was a real life collection of trade routes that ran from the far reaches of China all the way through Europe, North Africa. Obviously, there was a lot of trade that took place in Egypt and um, all throughout uh, the Middle East there. So the Silk Road was actually a collection. It wasn't one road, it was a collection of trade routes um, that was used uh, since ancient times up until, I imagine, part of it's probably still used today. Um, but the Silk Road itself, I think, came to an eventual end around the 15th century, somewhere in there. I'm not, I love history, but I'm not exactly a big history buff. So don't quote me on any of that. Always do your own research. Never believe anything you hear or see or read on the internet unless you've verified it yourself. All of that being the history of the magic lamps, um, and where those stories might have come from. Our idea today, with where the magic lamps originated from a creative standpoint. So, I had the idea of a merchant along the Silk Road who, one way or another, developed some enemies. And so he finds a way to create these magic lamps to entrap and enslave 10 enemies. Um, why 10? I don't know. It just seems like a good even number there. But obviously, you can change that however you feel like. My idea was he's creating these 10 magic lamps to ensnare his 10 enemies. So, who is this merchant? We got to start with the merchant, obviously. It's his story. Um, who is he? He works along the Silk Road. What does he sell? Obviously, he could sell silk. um, I kind of had in my head that he would be more like a spice merchant um, that goes out into these, rural areas, gathers the expensive spices, probably doesn't pay nearly as much for them as he intends to sell them for, which, good business practice for any merchant, I'd imagine. Um, Probably pays, pennies. Well, depending on the part of the world, I don't know what you would call them, but for these spices, maybe saffron, um, you know, rare peppers. I don't know. Maybe he's a tea trader. I imagine that was a pretty competitive business in the day. Um, when did this merchant live? Obviously, it would have to be a long time ago, um, predating any modern technology. Um, is he traveling by foot? I think he would have to at least have a wagon, one would think, if he's going to be a successful merchant, he's going to have to be able to carry a decent amount of merchandise. You'd have to research what kind of transportation was used along the Silk Road. Did they use donkeys? Did they use horses? Did they use, I don't know, it's that part of the world, maybe they used elephants sometimes. Did they use hand carts to carry stuff? I imagine that probably took place quite a bit. You think of the Asian rickshaws you've seen pictures of. So I imagine hand carts were used. Um, and it probably depended on how successful you were as to what you used. There probably were peddlers that just took what they could carry on their back. So where does our merchant fall in all this? Personally, I kind of had him on the lower end. Maybe he's got a mule, a donkey, something along those lines, a small cart. If you've ever seen Gone with the Wind, the size of the wagon that they used to escape Atlanta, that's kind of about the size cart I had in my head. Obviously, this is your story. You can make it whatever you want. He doesn't even have to be a merchant for that matter. He could have some other occupation during that day and time. The reason I chose for him to be a merchant, I wanted him traveling that Silk Road. One, because that's where, a lot of these stories originated in the oral tradition, but also because it gives him an opportunity to meet a lot of different people. So he's got to get this magic from somewhere. How does he figure out how to make the lamps? Does he meet a sorcerer of some kind? Does he meet a Hindu god? I don't know what kind of magic the different Hindu gods have. Um, if one of them would have had the means and been willing to pass along this kind of knowledge. I'm not really familiar with Hindu mythology. Um, I'm a little more familiar with Greek mythology, but I know that you can get a Greek god to do just about anything. And I know that there are numerous uh, powerful figures um, in that part of the world, both Hindu and other religions, I'd imagine. Um, Hundreds of magical and uh, powerful figures there that could potentially have been the source for this kind of magic. Um, because at the end of the day, this is a curse. He is creating a curse here. He's cursing his enemies. He's, enslaving them to these lamps. So you'd have to have some kind of mystical being, magical source that's willing to give this guy the opportunity to not only make mischief, but actually damage these people's lives permanently. Um, I imagine once you become a genie, there's no further contact with your family. They probably never know what happened to you. So there's a nefarious overtone to what he's doing. This isn't just a impulsive, I'm mad, so I'm going to lash out. This would have taken planning. It would have taken a decision to permanently ruin these people's lives. Not just their current life, but for all eternity. Because in theory, once you become a genie, you're then immortal and you're stuck forever. Or if Disney, would have you believe you can be freed from your lamp, but he never ages, he remains a genie. Uh, in the cartoon. Obviously, they took a different route in the live action, which I really liked. I liked what they did as far as how they ended his story in the live action. All that aside, I also really love movies. Um, so we've got this perhaps merchant. He's making runs back and forth on the Silk Road. He's gathered his spices or whatever. He's transporting them. Who are these enemies? Maybe they are brothers who betrayed him. Um, if you're familiar with uh, Joseph and the Coat of Many Colors, the biblical story, um, you'll know that his brothers threw him in a pit and sold him into slavery. So maybe our merchant, or whatever he is, has been betrayed by his brothers. Maybe he has a similar family situation to that and is wanting to seek revenge on his brothers. Um, Maybe he has friends that he feels slighted by. Maybe he had this, group that he thought that he was really tight with, and someone else came into the picture, and now they're, hanging out with a new guy, and kind of he feels left out. He feels betrayed by them, and he's wanting revenge for that. Maybe this new guy stole his girl. Maybe he overshadowed his reputation and who he thought he was becoming, and now the new guy is kind of replacing him in a way, and so he's wanting to hurt the new guy, and friends of his, former friends of his, that are showing a preference for this new guy instead of him. Maybe that's who the enemies of this merchant are. Maybe they're fellow merchants. Maybe he was jealous of their success. Maybe he was having too much competition and wasn't being able to sell his goods. Um, maybe something happened to him. Maybe he has a legitimate reason to be mad. Maybe his cart was robbed by a band of people, of thieves, and he's taking revenge on the thieves. Maybe, he's got a family back home that's depending on him, and if he doesn't get his stuff back, they starve to death. So maybe he's not doing this for as nefarious reasons. I know this, you got to be a certain kind of person to doom people for all eternity, but maybe it starts out as a legitimate, just trying to reconcile his situation, just trying to restore himself, and save his family. Maybe he was enslaved himself, and he's taking revenge on maybe 10 masters that bought and sold him. There's a lot of different routes you could go for who these enemies are, how they got on his bad side, and you know what his frame of mind is, his motivation for doing this to them. So he's decided he's angry at these 10 people, and he doesn't know what to do. He's trying to figure out how to get even, or how to get his stuff back if that's the route you're going, how to save his family if that's the route you're going. And anyway, he's got these 10 enemies, he's trying to figure out what to do. Maybe he's on his way back home without his stuff now on this Silk Road, on these routes, and he meets someone. Maybe he meets a sorcerer. Maybe it's Jack and the Beanstalk type of situation. Meet someone who's got this source of magic and is offering it to him. Maybe it's a trade-off. Maybe it's not revenge. Maybe this person who's got the source of this magic, or the being who's got the source of this magic, has 10 enemies that they can't directly attack for whatever reason. Maybe they're under some sort of protection, or he's been forbidden by a higher being, or maybe, I don't know, maybe he's taken some kind of vow he can't break, Hippocratic oath, if you will, of he can directly do no harm. So he decides he's going to find someone to trick into doing it for him. You know, I will give you these great riches, and all you have to do is, you know, present these 10 people with a gift, and each of them gets this lamp that when they open it, they're, you know, sucked in and trapped there. I don't know how you get trapped into a lamp. I was trying to remember how they did it in the movies. So maybe he's not a bad guy. Maybe he's just a gullible guy. Maybe he wasn't nefarious. Maybe the person who originally had the magic was the nefarious one. That actually would make sense, because I was trying to figure out what the motivation of the source of the magic would have for giving the magic to this guy. So maybe it was their enemies. What other motivation could this magical being have for helping this guy? Helping, scheming with this guy. If they are his enemies, what can he offer to the magical being? What does he have? Is he selling his soul? Offering his firstborn? That's kind of dark, but that does happen in a lot of stories. Is he pledging back some riches? I don't know. And let's say it's a, you know, minor god of some kind. What would he have that they would even want? Maybe they just like causing mischief. Maybe they like the idea of causing harm. I don't know. Or maybe they want to be the first person to use these lamps. That's 30 wishes. Well, at the end of the day, he meets someone, a sorcerer, another person who has acquired some kind of magical source. What would the source be? Do they give him like glowing orbs? That this is the magic, like a bag of like glowing orbs. He's gonna imbue, you know, this magic into these lamps. Oh, I know who this guy could be, because he's gonna have to actually make the lamps. He could be a metal worker, and he's selling his wares that he has made. Ooh, there's an idea. Because otherwise, he would have to have, either they would have to give him the lamps already made, or he would have to have a friend or a relative who's a metal worker who could make these lamps. But it makes more sense if he makes them. So maybe he's not really so much a merchant as he's just selling something he has made. And I don't know what all goes into making one of these lamps. Obviously, you'd have to have a really hot fire. And I would think you would have to have some kind of mold to pour the metal into. I've only seen one magic lamp that was made out of metal, and it had a seam running down the length of it, like they had made the two halves and then put them together. I don't know if that's traditionally how a oil lamp was made. I know oil lamps generally, unless they're being made for somebody uber rich, would not have been, they may not have even been metal, they may have been clay. We're going to have to research that, what the lamps would have been made of, whether they would have been made of clay or if they would have been made of metal. But let's assume they're metal. So he would have to have really hot fire. He would have to have a mold of some kind to pour the metal into to shape it how he wants. And then I imagine a number of different hand tools for getting, everything cleaned up in the exact shape it needs to be. So there's a lot that would go into making these lamps. It's not like, you can't really carry a forge with you. I don't think there's such a thing as a portable forge, especially, in ancient times. I would think, and again, please research all this before you write. I would think that he would have had to have returned back to his home, to his forge, in order to make these lamps. Now, if they were clay lamps, he might have had a little more flexibility with making them on the road, because there are tools and things that go into pottery. And the biggest thing is having the kiln, the really hot oven where you make it. But in theory, the kiln could be transported or made on site. Let's say wherever he's doing this, let's say he's returned home to his own forge. Again, please change this however you want it to be. Let's just say he's returned home to his own forge. So he's making these lamps, which he's got to imbued with this magic power. Maybe the power doesn't come in like glowing little orbs. Maybe, and this seems more likely to me, maybe he's got a jar that's got a liquid in it, and the magic is contained within this liquid, like it's an elixir of some kind that he, I don't know if you'd say tempers the metal with. I don't think that's the right phrasing there. I think of tempering chocolate. But maybe he adds this liquid to the metal while he's heating the metal. And then when he casts the lamps, they have the power from whatever this liquid was. Or maybe it's an oil. They're oil lamps? That would make sense, right? Maybe it's an oil that's got the magic imbued inside. So he makes the lamps, he fills them up with oil, and then when the recipients light the oil lamps, then the magic happens, and they're pulled inside the lamps as genies. Could be interesting. I like that. I like the idea of the magic being an oral, but it could be anything. It could be pixie dust. I don't know. Whatever you want it to be. Dust would definitely be easier. It would be easier to transport, easier to work with. Like, oh, I made a lamp. I'm sprinkling it with pixie dust. Ta-da! Magic. Um, and maybe going back to who the magical being is, maybe it's like a made-up creature. Like thinking about pixies. Maybe it's, I don't know what kind of creatures there were, like magical creatures there were in that area of the world. I know the Far East, there was like dragons and things, but surely there was lots of other magical creatures. Every area of the world, I feel like, has a collection of magical creatures in their mythology. So, again, you would have to research. And the nice thing, too, about it being along the Silk Road is you can draw from anything all the way from China to Egypt. Like any magic that exists along that span, any creatures, any beings. I mean, you could even include historical figures and events from anywhere along that stretch of land. And even beyond that, because I imagine there were a lot of travelers that came from further reaches down towards the Silk Road to get things that they wanted or needed or whatever that you couldn't get, you know. I mean, you think about even in more recent, I don't want to say modern, but in more recent times, like when America was first colonized, how much trouble they went through to import tea. Which is funny because you actually can grow tea in the US, but it's not as easily grown here. It only grows in certain areas. So, you know, you could have had people from literally anywhere on Earth. Okay, well, that side of the Earth, you know, who would come along this Silk Road at some point. So it really opens up an entire realm of possibilities. I kind of like the magical creature thing too. I don't know if I would want to use a god because I don't really like using religious figures because I want to make sure that I'm being respectful of other religions and I don't want to make light of someone else's religion, even though it's not what I believe. And let's forget that mic's there. Even though it's not what I believe personally, you know, I don't want to be disrespectful of what someone else believes because I want them to be respectful of what I believe as well. So I want to treat other people the way I want to be treated. So I don't know that I would really want to use a god. I think I would be more comfortable using some kind of, you know, other magical being, a sorcerer, you know, some magical creature. Um, I'm trying to think other stories that have used magic, different places they get it. And sometimes it's never explained where it all comes from, which is why we're telling this story, because it was never explained where the lamps came from. And it may never be fully explained where the magic comes from, just that he acquires it and who he acquires it from. Um, you kind of have to have this understanding that in stories, in the mythology of the world, that magic exists in the world. Now, you may personally believe that it does in real life or it doesn't, but for a huge portion of literature, magic does exist in the world in different forms, that it's part of Earth's life force, um, that it's, you know, depending on the story or the belief system, that it's actually running through everything, that there's this magic. Um, that just like we have, wind that blows all over the earth, water that flows all over the earth, that there's also a stream of magic. Um, some people believe it's in the earth and part of the earth itself. Some people believe that it's in the heavens and, flowing through the stars. Um, and you don't have to believe any of that. You can write stories about magic even if you don't believe it exists in real life. Personally, I don't believe in magic per se. I have religious beliefs, um, but magic is not part of my belief system. That being said, it's fiction. We can write whatever we want. That's the beauty of it. So he makes these lamps. He imbues the power into them. But my thought with my original idea, and there again, you can abandon this whole deal if you've had another idea. Great, please do. My original thought was that he's trying to make the lamps, and maybe he's never made them before. That maybe they have to be made to specific um, specifications. They have to be made to exact specifications to work with this magic. Maybe they have to be of a certain size, certain shape. I don't imagine. You have to kind of think about how an oil lamp works, because you've got the bowl where the oil is sitting, and then you actually light it away from the oil, one would presume with a wick. Um, I'm thinking of how a kerosene lamp works. You have the bowl at the bottom, you have a big flat but fat wick that's coiled in the oil, and then it tapers off so that only the wick is coming through, and then you have your dome at the top and there's a little crank. So you would light the part of the wick that's up in that top section, put your dome on, and then you can turn the little crank to make the wick feed up so that as it burns down, you can put more wick up. And I know that I've never seen an ancient type of oil lamp used. Um, and they may not look like the ones we see in the movies. They may have looked very, very different. I know that in the Bible it refers to trimming the wick on your lamp. So one would presume that it worked similarly to a kerosene lamp, with the wick coiled in the oil in the main part of the body and then it extending elsewhere. I don't know. I'd have to research. I should have already researched, but I'd have to research exactly how a lamp works. All that to say, I chase a lot of rabbits, guys. All that to say, in my mind, he's making these lamps, and the first few don't go well. They fail for whatever reason. Maybe he didn't get the temperature right on the metal. Maybe by adding, the magic into the metal, it changes, the temperatures and things, and it's not setting right. And so he has to adjust for that, to make the fire hotter or slightly cooler, or have it sit for a different amount of time. I don't know. Again, research, research, research. Maybe that's why I didn't pursue this story, because there's so much research you'd have to do. Okay, you don't have to. No one's probably going to fuss at you if it's not accurate. I like things to be accurate. That's one of my flaws. As a writer, that can be a very big flaw when you get so caught up in accuracy. So he's got the first few lamps that don't make the cut. For whatever reason, he's thrown them, cast them off. He says they're failures. I'm trying to make these lamps. These are no good. And then he gets the hang of it and makes the 10 lamps. So for this idea that I originally had to work, the magic would have to be in the metal, I suppose, or whatever he's making the lamps out of, because he doesn't get it made to spec. So he cast it off thinking that it wasn't finished, it wasn't made to spec, it was broken, whatever. And because of that, the magic doesn't work. So he makes this lamp, he tries it out, the magic doesn't work. He would have to have some way of knowing, some way of trying it, some way of knowing whether or not it had worked. So we'd have to address that. Obviously, there's one way of knowing if it worked is exposing it to the person it's supposed to capture. I'm guessing pointing at it, rubbing the lamp, and they get sucked in, maybe. But you wouldn't want to do that and waste your lamp by capturing the wrong person or creature. Oh, or he could. Maybe he tries to capture like a cat or something, and then when the genie goes in, he's got a pet cat. I like this idea. If I was going to be trapped for all time, enslaved as a genie, I would want a pet cat. So maybe he tries it out on the local animals. Maybe he captures a pigeon or something. Okay, so yeah, we could go this route. I can roll with this. So he makes the lamp, he rubs it, points it at the cat or the bird or whatever's sitting there. The donkey. I don't think he'd risk wasting a donkey. Um, but it doesn't work. It doesn't capture anything. So he casts it off and he keeps working. And eventually he rubs one and it gets the cat and he's like, now I know what I'm doing. He makes the rest of the lamps. Meanwhile, you've got this cast off lamp. This is your 11th lamp. So he's made the lamp. It didn't work how he expected it to work. So he's cast it off. And little does he know, unbeknownst to him, it has a different kind of magic. He didn't get it made to specification, so the magic he was going for hasn't worked. But the magic was already in the metal, and it still has magic. So what are the powers of this new lamp? So we know the original 10 captures people, enslave them as genies. What does this 11th lamp do? It didn't meet the specifications in order to capture anyone. So what does it do? I was thinking it would be something terrible and destructive. I promise, I'm not a villain. But I was thinking that it's something that's going to unleash something terrible one day. So you would have to decide what this lamp can do, what this 11th lamp can do. He doesn't know it can do anything. So maybe you go through the whole story of him and his goals and how he ended up in this predicament, what he decided to do about it, who helps him, how he's made the lamps, how he's captured the people. Maybe he rides off, down the Silk Road with his horse and cart, and he's got the 10 lamps in the back that now have genies in them, and he's going to go sell them. Or he's going to offer them to some rich sultan or maharaja or, whatever, in exchange for, gold or riches or a place in his court, whatever he's going to do with it. and his story comes to an end. Or maybe something tragic happens to him, as karma. I don't believe in karma either, but because it makes you know what I'm talking about, I'm going to use the word. Maybe as karma for his, dooming these 10 people, something terrible happens to him. Maybe he's on his way to sell these 10 lamps or trade them for power and riches, and his cart wrecks, falls off a cliff, he dies, and the lamps are then lost to time. They fall into a river, and who knows where they end up. They wash ashore on the far corners of the earth. You could have all kinds of stuff happen with these lamps. But his story, however you decide to end it, comes to an end. But then, as an end credits scene, this has suddenly become 2 books. I don't know what just happened. As an end credits scene, we go back to the 11th lamp that is sitting there. He's never coming back. He's never going to find out that it actually has magic. And maybe someone picks it up and something happens to them. Maybe they think it's just a normal lamp, and when they light it, I don't know what kind of magic happens. Something happens. Or maybe that lamp is lost to time. His forge falls into ruins. Get my teacup. His forge falls into ruins, and it's dug up 1,000, 1,500 years later as an archaeology site. 3,000 years later, I don't know, as an archaeology site, and they find the intact lamp in the remnants of this old forge. Because a forge, you would think you would be able to dig up way later, because you've got, your fire pit, you would assume would be made out of large stones. um, Burning hot, super hot fires would, I would think, really solidify, that area around it. But you've got a lot of stone and tools and metal. You would think that that would be something you could find, relatively easily. I hate to say easily because it's never easy to find these things, but that it would still be evident if a forge was at that location. So they find the forge, archaeologists, whoever, or maybe not even that long. Maybe it's just like 50 years later, 30 years later, and somebody just stumbles across this forge in the woods and finds this lamp. So maybe something terrible happens to the finder, or something good. In your story, it might be good magic, but something happens to the finder of the lamp. Or you go the other way with it, and it's not the type of magic that only affects the individual with the lamp. Maybe it's the type of magic that is unleashed on an entire area or the entire world, that there's this lamp that the magic has gone wrong, and instead of drawing in and enslaving one person as was originally intended, this magic is now going to be causing destruction on a large scale. What's the Indiana Jones movie where with the Ark of the Covenant, that they open it and horrible things just happen to everyone in the vicinity? Maybe it's something like that. So a lot of different avenues you could take, a lot of different paths you could go down. And maybe you don't even want to have the 11th lamp. Maybe you just want to stick to his story. Maybe it's not even a him. Maybe it's somebody else entirely. Maybe it's, I don't know, a mother who's trying to do something and needs magic to accomplish it. Maybe she's got to stay up all night working and taking care of her kids, and she needs a magical lamp that'll never burn out. And she's tricked and gets the magic wrong, whatever. And instead, she's the first genie. Who knows? Maybe there's only one lamp. Maybe there's not 11 or 10. Maybe there's only one. Maybe you could write the original story of how the one lamp and the one genie came to be. I just always felt like there would be more than one lamp and more than one genie. Because if you can create that, why would you stop at one? I'm just saying. So, a lot of thoughts, a lot of paths. Much like the Silk Road, it was long, winding, and deviated off in many directions. But hopefully, you have enjoyed this session. Hopefully, it will help you to write your story, whatever your story is, whether it's this or something else. Hopefully, you had a great morning with me, or night. I don't know, where are you? It's night where you are. I'm glad you were here. I'm glad, if you're watching this later, that you found me. I hope you'll join me again. And whatever happens, just keep writing. Bye, guys.